Okay. And
When does it go from being practice session?
all right, everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Matt Puglisi. I'm the director of the Community Investment Fund 2030 with the Department of Economic and Community Development. And I'm joined by Melinda Wilson, who joined DECD this fall as the assistant director for the Community Investment Fund. Many of you may be familiar with Melinda and her work over the past few years with sector down in the southeastern corner of our state, and we're really excited to have her on board here. Just a heads up, as we start this, we will be doing Q&A at the end. Please submit your questions, but please wait until we get going into the presentation, as we'll probably answer many of your questions during the presentation. And a warning, we are recording the webinar. It is going to be posted, both last week's webinar and this week's webinar, on our website. It'll be just available for you to watch directly. You don't have to log in for anything to do that. And we are also joined by Alexandra Daum, DECD's Deputy Commissioner, one of our two Deputy Commissioners, I should say. And so, Alexandra, can I pass it over to you for an introduction?
Yep. Good afternoon, everyone. 3 minutes afternoon. So we're excited possibly to introduce CIF to some folks on the phone, also reintroduce possibly to people that were familiar with it in round one. And the purpose of today is just to make sure people understand exactly what opportunity the Community Investment Fund is bringing to Connecticut. It's a big opportunity, spoiler alert, $175 million a year, or almost a third of Connecticut's towns and cities are eligible. So this is a lot of money for towns and cities that have not traditionally had access to economic development funds in the same way that some of our more affluent towns have had. And so that's the real goal here, is to try to make sure we're getting dollars out into the communities that need them. And so we want to make sure everyone knows how great of an opportunity this is. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of who can take advantage, what types of projects are likely to be successful, because we want to make sure we're not wasting your time. You have a project that's ready to go and you hear the criteria from Matt and Melinda, and it sounds great, and you've got your project ready to go, please apply. And if not, if you need 6 months, there are going to be 8 more rounds after this of community investment funds, 4 years to a year. So please, take your time, work with Matt and Melinda, and get your application ready for the best foot forward for whenever that is in the future. I hope you could hear that. I just got a little message that my internet is unstable, which is very bad timing, but hopefully that was all good. And with that, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, and we'll be here to answer questions for sure.
Great, thanks, Alexandra. And yeah, we lost a little of it, so I'll just re-emphasize it's a 5-year program. This is round 2, 2 rounds per year, up to $175 million to be awarded each year. The 2 rounds, we're trying, for everybody's planning purposes, and and all the different grants that you have, to keep them kind of in the same late spring open, fall open, but we'll, with each round, kind of adjust that based on when we complete the recommendation from the board level. Just to give people an overview that might not be aware. So in round 1, we had 147 eligible applications that came in requesting over $900 million, and 35 out of the 55 eligible communities were represented in some way, either through a nonprofit, a community development corporation, or the municipality itself. So it is a competitive program. So getting into things, we're going to walk through everything today: program eligibility, project categories, statutory priorities, the application process, and we'll also highlight some common errors and challenges that we observed in the first round. Just, to be clear here, this is different than some other DECD grants. DECD is serving as the administrator of the CIF program, but the Community Investment Fund has a board of directors who will be making the decision on which grants that they recommend to the governor for funding, and then ultimately the governor approves and puts on the State Bond Commission agenda for approval. So we'll start with overview of the eligible applicants. There's 3 types of eligible applicants. Municipalities, they are public investment communities and alliance districts. There's no difference if your community is a public investment community or an alliance district or both. There's been one community that has been added since round 1. Community development corporations and nonprofits that operate within those 55 municipalities are also eligible applicant types. Joint applications are allowed, but both applicants need to be eligible. So if you're a nonprofit or a CDC and you serve multiple communities, all CIF funds clearly need to be used towards a project that serves eligible communities. And you'll talk about how it is and have to substantiate in your application how you serve those eligible communities. All of the current eligible communities will stay eligible for the 5 years of the CIF program. So if your community drops off the public investment community or alliance list, next year, you'll remain eligible until this program closes after round 10. However, new communities could be added in the future. This information does appear in the policy and guideline document, and that's available on the application page of the CIF website. So once you establish that the project's an eligible applicant type and an eligible community, the next piece for eligibility is that it has to have both of these 2 things that are on the screen. It needs to promote economic or community development in the municipality where the project is located. And then number 2, it needs to further the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. And I'm going to read the full statutory language here so that everybody understands who these underserved populations can be, where they can come from. So it includes individuals who belong to underserved and marginalized communities that have been denied such treatment, such as Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer persons, and other persons comprising the LGBTQ+ community, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. And we're just stressing this. We really want to make sure that applicants are complying with the letter of the law here on eligibility. As we think about the first piece, these economic and community development projects, as the Community Investment Fund Board has talked about this great opportunity here, $875 million over the 5 years, these are projects that should be transformational. These are also projects that should come from the community, have community involvement and input. And we'll say transformational probably at least 60 times in the remaining presentation. But when we boil that down, a simple way to think about that is new outcomes or increased outcomes. And so in the application, we'll be asking you about what the outcomes are going to be. And, we're looking for intentionality here in the process and how you're developing this, how the community has been involved, and where this project's going to take the community. So now that you have established your eligibility, the next piece is the types of projects. So there's 2 buckets for the project types. We have capital improvement projects and small business support programs. And capital improvement types are all outlined in the notice of funding availability, but include brownfield remediation, affordable housing, infrastructure improvements, public facility renovation or acquisition. It includes the establishment or improvement to clean energy projects, capital projects to improve and facilitate home rehabilitation programs, and other public facilities such as libraries or senior centers. The grant and aid proposed by a municipality, community development corporation, or nonprofit on the small business support program side is not for one individual small business. It's for a revolving loan program, microloans or gap financing to small businesses that are located within the municipality or the municipality that's served by the corporation or organization. The only place that grant funds can be provided is as startup funds to establish a small business in any such municipality. And so that means not to establish one small business, but to create a program that would support startup small businesses within that eligible municipality. There is a minimum of $250,000 of requested CIF funding, but there's not a maximum to the request. So it really is a great opportunity to think really big and boldly. There is the opportunity for there to be partial funding. So, if you have an idea as a community and you need to go through more of a planning process, you need to think about that in terms of communicating to the board what that end result is, and then communicating what steps you need to take to determine feasibility, whether that's community input, design, market, or other feasibility studies, and then indicate how much you need towards that planning process. On the small business support program side, again, these are for small businesses, but not for one small business. So, an ideal way to think about this is, a community to do a revolving loan program to support, facade improvements on a street or in a neighborhood. We saw a lot of ineligible applications that came in under this category, oftentimes thinking that a small business support program could support something like an after-school program or technical assistance program to small businesses, or direct individual startup funds for one small business. So we just want to say this really clearly and emphasize this to save people a lot of time that they put into the application for what at the end of the day is not an eligible type of submission. The statute also requires that any proposed loan or financing must utilize an interest rate that does not vary from the prevailing market rate. That's for the small business support program. So whatever it is that you're proposing, you want to demonstrate how your rate is consistent with similar programs. Under the capital improvement side, in terms of affordable housing applications, there is information in the notice of funding availability on the DECD affordable housing policy, and just flagging this is new since round one, and this is what your proposal will be evaluated against. So within the authorizing statute, there are 4 different statutory priorities. And there was some confusion in the language that was discovered late in the process last summer, and we did update that in the final round of FAQs, but just want to stress on this. So prioritization for these first 3 bullet points is only extended to municipal projects. So if a municipality has implemented local hiring preferences pursuant to section 7-112 of the general statutes, if the municipal applicant has or will leverage municipal, private, philanthropic, or federal funds for the project, and if the municipal project has a letter of support from General Assembly members. This, again, all those first 3 only apply to municipal applications. If you're a nonprofit or a CDC, there are ways for us to assess that under the DECD best practices, which we'll get to. The one area, though, that does extend to all applicant types is a project labor agreement that includes an employment proposal to employ ex-offenders or individuals with physical, intellectual, and developmental disabilities. And in terms of the leverage piece, just want to stress that state funding needs, everything that we've outlined here are non-state funds. So another DECD grant, funds from, another division of the state or from the Office of Brownfields Remediation, for example, would not trigger the leverage piece. So DECD serves as the administrator of the CIF program, and the Community Investment Fund Board of Directors will be making the decision on which grants that they recommend to the governor for funding. In our role as administrator, we review programs for their eligibility, so everything that we've gone over thus far, and highlight these 4 statutory priorities. And then we're also going to look at how applications align with the state's economic action plan, and that's available linked on the CIF website. Within that action plan, the 4 pillars of inclusive growth that are outlined include workforce, communities, innovation, and business environment. And then DECD is also going to look for programs that follow DECD best practices and represent an efficient use of taxpayer funds. So what does that mean? That means projects that are shovel ready, projects that are leveraging funding. So again, if you're a nonprofit or CDC, this is where we would indicate that you're bringing non-state funds to the table. A realistic and comprehensive budget, limiting soft costs, a realistic and comprehensive project plan. And then I would stress that on the small business support programs, there is already a small business boost program that's being run by the state and NDC. And proposals that are duplicative of this program will not be identified as an efficient use of state funds in the executive summary. So if you're thinking about a small business support program, I encourage you to go look at what is already being run by, provided, I should say, through the Small Business Boost program. So in terms of that small business support program, I think the best guidance that we can give is that you're the experts in this area. So look at what the state is already doing through Business Boost, and then look at the gaps that exist. And that is how you kind of make a compelling application around a small business support program. And then just flagging for municipalities that in accordance with Connecticut General Statute 8-23 and amended by Public Act 15-95, any municipality that has not adopted a plan of conservation and development within the past 10 years is ineligible for discretionary state funding unless they request and receive a waiver from the prohibition by the OPM secretary. So municipalities will need to submit a municipal certification of eligibility for discretionary state funding. And I would just say if you are a municipality that needs to do that, you don't need to wait until you submit your application, on January 6th, you can submit that letter to OPM sooner. So that way there's no delay in OPM coming back with whatever their response is to us as we're reviewing applications. And then in terms of small business support programs, just stressing also that the board is going to be it's required under the statute to consider certain factors, the risk of default on payment of proposed loans and financing, the impact on job creation or retention, and the impact on blighted properties, and the overall impact on the community. So those are pieces that you're going to want to stress in your grant narrative. DECD also has to assess programs in this category to make sure that they align with small business financing best practices. So per the statute, financing programs that vary from the prevailing market rate shall not be recommended for funding. An example of prevailing market rate would be the Small Business Boost program, but we would also say, rates change. So if you as an organization have a way of establishing your rates for lending, you can use that, but you need to submit what your process is for determining that rate and how you have determined that. So there are lots of different project types. We're going to get into the attachments here. There are lots of different project types that are eligible for CIF, and they're going to be in different phases of development. So it's hard to provide everybody one list that says this is the required attachment. So the responsibility really rests with you as an applicant to put together all of the relevant attachments that support your application and help DECD and also the board understand your project and where it is. The process is going to be a little bit different this time for everybody that applied in the first round, but it will be similar to the most recent rounds of Brownfields and the Connecticut Community Challenge applications. You're going to request a SharePoint folder and put all of your attachments into that folder directly. So that way you'll be able to see what is being submitted and what's not. I know we had that issue with the uploading during round one, and we're hoping that this addresses that and eliminates that confusion. In terms of the required attachments for the municipalities, you're going to need to have that municipal certification of eligibility for discretionary state funding. Every project that is going to be doing work on a facility that is older than 40 years or breaking ground that has not been disturbed is going to have to submit a SHPO project notification form. Every municipality is going to have to include their municipal certification to request funding. And then every application needs to include the CIF budget template. And this is a new template this time. It's in Excel, so we hope that that is easier for everybody to use and make things very clear. But our CIF budget template is really sources and uses. So we would also request you upload your own detailed project budget. You can use your own format. There's nothing's provided from us to guide you there, but we're looking for more details so that way we can get dig in a little bit further than that sources and uses. So we'll walk through the review process. So applications are due on January 6th, and then DECD goes through and prepares an executive summary on all of these applications. And we're actually allowing in the application this time for you to write an executive summary that provides an overview so that we can use that at least as a starting point. And that way you're able to express your project in your own words. We're going to look for the prioritizations, how this aligns with the state's economic action plan, DECD best practices, and then stress any other strengths and weaknesses about your app, where you are in process. And these strengths and weaknesses, are really designed to just help guide, some of the hurdles that are in front of projects for them to move forward. CIF then will present these executive summaries and all of the material to the CIF board. I should say DECD will present all of these executive summaries and materials to the CIF board. They will review the application and then vote on recommendations to the governor. The governor then reviews the recommended applications and issues his final recommendations to the State Bond Commission within 60 days. And the State Bond Commission then finally votes for approval on projects, and that's when projects move from recommended status to funded status. So the deadline to submit the application is Friday, January 6th at 4:00 p.m. Please, you don't have to wait until the last minute. Please submit sooner if you can. We will be working to set a date, most likely in April, that the CIF board is going to meet to review and recommend applications to the governor. We have, not set dates here for when the governor is going to move these to the State Bond Commission, when that'll happen, but we would expect that it happens before the end of the fiscal year, so June 30th of 2023. In terms of projects, just some other pieces that I want to go over. Timeline in terms of where the projects are. They can be in process at any stage, but the more specifics you have, the farther down the road you are towards the project being ready to go, the more definite information in terms of what the outcomes are, what the budget is, right? That is going to present a stronger project to the board, but you want to give your full vision for what the end result of the project is so that the board really understands what the goal is. And you can come back to CIF in future rounds for additional funding or for the same project if it wasn't funded in a prior round. There's no guarantee that if you receive partial funding and you come back that you're going to receive additional funding in a future round, and the opposite. There's no guarantee that you would not. Every time the applications will be assessed on their merits. So right now there's several documents that are available on the CIF website, and you can view the CIF policy and guidelines adopted by the board, the notice of funding availability and the application. And I think we should be getting an application instruction document up as well. We will also be doing an FAQ document. It'll be posted next week, and we'll continue to update that FAQ document as time goes on, as good relevant questions get submitted from all of you. Application submission, everything is going to be submitted electronically online through the CIF website. No paper or hard copies will be accepted. Please do not email applications or attachments to us. Again, we went through on a prior slide what attachments are required, but anything else that is relevant and supports your project is allowed, and we'll have a recommended list on those application instructions. You're gonna, as we said, we're changing the process for submitting attachments, so you will have to email Community Investment Fund at ct.gov to request your unique SharePoint folder, and please indicate the email address of anyone on your team that needs access. Please also inform anybody that you're adding them to that so that they don't think that we're spamming them. That's something that we've seen happen over the last week. All attachments need to be uploaded by 4 o'clock on Friday, January 6th, same due date as the application being submitted. After that, you're going to lose access to the folder. And we ask you that you limit any attachments to JPEG, PDF, Word, and Excel documents. A couple of major changes about the application process. So there's 2 separate application portals, capital projects and small business support programs. So please make sure that you select the right one. We have added some questions based on our review during round 1, divided up some 2-part questions as applicants weren't always answering both parts. And I think that the biggest change is the word limit for narrative answers. So we're looking for you to be succinct and thorough in your responses. And we think adding this word limit is going to help applicants communicate the important elements of their responses more clearly. And again, the updated CIF budget form is required. There is no project that doesn't need a budget. So please provide that as well as your own budget. And then, because now we're into round 2, we are offering an abbreviated reapplication process for round 1 applications that were not recommended for funding. So this is only for round 1 applications that were not recommended for funding or received partial funding. And this is only for eligible applications from round 1. If your application was ruled ineligible, you're going to need to submit through the portal. This alternative process is optional. You're welcome to submit through the portal and resubmit the entire application if that's what you prefer, but we're trying to be conscious of everybody's time and capacity. And there's not going to be a preference given to either method in terms of how DECD will evaluate for round 2. So for this abbreviated process, you're going to send a PDF letter as well as any relevant attachments to Community Investment Fund at ct.gov by the same deadline as the application, Friday, January 6th at 4 o'clock p.m. And this letter should include the project title, a statement that you want your project to be considered for round 2. You're going to provide an executive summary, 300 words or less. Then we're asking you to respond to any weaknesses in the executive summary that were identified in round 1. I would also stress if there's anything that you think is critical to your project that you don't see reflected in that executive summary, you can also include that. Then provide any updates to the project since the original submission. So for example, if you had indicated that you had grants that you had applied for, and now those grants have been confirmed or rejected, that would be something that you would want to update us on. Any updated or additional attachments. So, letters from funders confirming grants, or if your construction documents went from, partially complete to, more complete or fully complete, you would want to update those. And then every applicant that goes through this reapplication process here, this is going to include the new budget template and any additional budget detail. So then really quickly, before we get into questions, just want to kind of go over some round one lessons in summary to help everybody that applied in round one and people that have not, but want to learn from that process. And a lot of these we've touched on at some point, but we really feel that it's worth emphasizing this. So the underserved audience identification. So this is a part of the basic eligibility for the CIF program. And we really are looking for applicants to be intentional in their response. We often saw communities that kind of simply rested on the fact that their municipality was eligible on the Public Investment Community Alliance District list, meaning that it had an underserved population in it, but it didn't really identify who was going to benefit. And there isn't a right or wrong answer here. There isn't one population that is better than another. We're just looking for applicants to be intentional in their thought. Then the next piece is the intentionality of the process. We've heard community investment fund board members, say about this, that it's the community investment fund, not the city investment fund. They're looking to see how the community is involved in this project. So we have questions that talk about the involvement of the target population. And again, we're looking for intentionality in the process, how you're going to involve, how you have involved them, how you have had that dialogue, how you have learned and identified the solution for the problem facing the community. Again, there's not a right or wrong answer here. There's different ways to be thoughtful and intentional. They don't have to be expensive or fancy processes involving consultants and surveys, but they can be. They can also be simple and community-driven methods. And it's important because we're trying to assess how the proposed project is going to have the intended impact on the target population and the challenges that are facing the target population in your community. And again, transformative projects. We say transformative a lot around the Community Investment Fund. And what does that mean? Very simply, it's new outcomes or increased outcomes. And so think about this when you talk about what your organization or your municipality is currently doing and what the project will do. And really the place to do that is when we ask you how you define success for your project. And then programmatic expenses. So we saw a lot of requests for programmatic expenses. So a workforce training program, an after-school tutoring program, childcare program, while these can have a transformative impact on an underserved population, programmatic expenses are not eligible for CIF. So you can renovate your facility or expand your facility to provide a new program type or increase your capacity of an existing program, but it's only the capital expenses that are eligible, not the additional staff, the operating utilities, consumable supplies that you're going to be using. And then just in other expenses that are not covered, in no particular order, we saw many proposals that tried to include new staff. Again, operating ongoing expenses not eligible. We saw proposals for facilities that would be rented and that month-to-month rent included. That's not eligible. Utilities are not eligible. On the small business support program side, two common things that we saw was putting a time limit on the program for just the 5 years. The program is authorized for 5 years to provide grant money, but that doesn't mean that the program needs to end in 5 years. The other common thing that we saw in small business support programs was a request for just one new small business to receive money. And again, a small business program funds multiple businesses, not just one new business. So we can switch over for some questions. You can also email questions to communityinvestmentfund@ct.gov. You can also schedule a one-on-one 30-minute meeting with Melinda or myself. The link to do that is on our website. And I will stop talking and pass it to Melinda to see what kind of questions we have.
Okay, we have a few coming in. Please elaborate on the project labor agreement.
So a project labor agreement would be a labor agreement that you'd have to develop that would be focused on either, not right on the slide, hiring ex-offenders to work on the project, or hiring people with intellectual, physical, or developmental disabilities. And so I think, that's on you if that is part of your project. Again, that's only for the statutory prioritization. It is not a requirement of the project. So I would, direct you to, council to see if that's something that, fits within the scope of your project.
Okay. You mentioned, Matt, that you could apply to renovate a facility. Can this be any type of facility? Could a nonprofit apply to purchase and/or renovate a facility for their program that serves marginalized communities?
Yeah, so I mean, we're taking a broad, definition of public facility, anything that is open to the public in some capacity, whether that's for, a public library, a senior center, it could be an arts center. There's, a YMCA, a Boys and Girls Club. There can be a variety of public facilities. A nonprofit can apply to renovate one. A nonprofit could apply to acquire one. Again, if you are looking to make a significant expansion of a facility or acquire a facility for the first time, CIF funds can be used towards the capital expense, but not towards the ongoing operational expense. And, as we're evaluating, is this a good use of state taxpayer dollars? You're going to want to include a budget and show a pro forma for how you're going to afford to operate this facility moving forward because there's no CIF or other state support that is connected to operating costs in those out years.
So here's a little bit of a related question. Are nonprofits able to submit applications for a capital project in a location where they have a long-term lease, 10+ years, not the rent, just the capital project to build out on an expanded site?
Is the question whether the capital project is eligible within a lease?
In a leased facility with a long-term lease.
Yeah, I think we've had that come up before. So as long as the applicant is going to maintain control over those improvements for a long period of time, which it sounds like they are, then I think that would be eligible. Matt, do you have a different opinion?
No, I concur with you.
Great, thanks. Can an organization submit an application for more than one project?
Yes. There's a couple different questions about round one funding, and I think the best thing, we have a list of the projects on our website that were funded. So I think rather than go through them here, there's a fairly comprehensive 5-page list of all the projects that got funding with their amounts of funding, all that. So I'd refer folks to that list on our website.
And the only thing I would add off of that is, because I've had some of these questions one-on-one, that round one list does not mean that those are the only types of projects. Lots of the eligible project types are represented in that list, but that doesn't mean that because a certain project wasn't funded in round one, that it wouldn't be funded going forward.
I also saw a question about shovel readiness and not yet having a building under site control. And I think the answer we would just give to questions like this in general is it's a very competitive program with a lot of, we suspect, a similarly high demand for the funds as we had last time, as Matt described. So the more shovel ready you are, the more clear you are about what your project is, the better. We don't know exactly where that line in the sand will be, because perhaps your project will shine in so many other ways that the project readiness is something that the board is willing to overlook. So there's really no line in the sand, as in if you don't have all of your zoning and permits and everything in place, you won't be considered. It's not, that's not the case. It's not an eligibility criteria, but of course, put your best foot forward, and make sure your project is as ready as it can be, because it is going to be a very competitive round of funding.
Okay, here's a straightforward one. Can a resubmission use the abbreviated process if the budget sources change or a different CIF amount is being requested, but other info stays the same?
Yeah, if it's the same project, in terms of, narrative, that's fine. Anything that you need to clarify can be included in the letter, and if there's changes to the budget in terms of either the request amount or other sources of funding, you just provide that updated information.
Okay.
There's a question about scoring criteria for funding. I think Matt may have touched on this. There is not DECD is not the scoring entity or the deciding entity. The board makes the decision, and there's not a formalized criteria that they've shared publicly on how they make that decision. So it's based on the strengths and weaknesses of the project, with not a formal rubric. Again, not a formal rubric that's been shared.
I will say that there are a few questions in here which are very specific to specific projects. So as you'll see on the website, you can schedule for a one-on-one consultation with Matt or me, and we can go through the details on that. So if your question isn't answered here and it's about a specific project, please schedule with us or send an email to the Community Investment Fund.
There's a question about, can we give some guidance on how to determine the amount of a particular project? And I would just say, it's like many of my answers, you're trying to find the fine line between, of course, we want to keep this as efficient as possible for taxpayers, and we want to fund projects in a modest, realistic amount and get the results. But having said that, don't under budget. We have a couple projects that submitted and then said, oh, actually, sorry, we need twice as much. And that's not, the chances of getting a second CIF award are slim. It's hard enough to get the first one. So please make sure that these are comprehensive, realistic budgets that are going to take you through the full scope of the project.
And here's a question about the small business section of the opportunity. Grants to cover startup costs for new businesses were deemed allowable during round one. Are grants or startup costs allowable during round two?
Yeah, nothing has changed around what type of small business programs are eligible in round two. We're just trying to, emphasize that for, I think, a small business support program to be competitive, it shouldn't be duplicative of the Small Business Boost Fund, something that's already out there and available to everybody.
Here's another question related. Can the small business loan program include several contiguous eligible communities? Also, could funds be used to refinancing existing debt along with incurring new debt?
All right, I was reading other questions.
Can you say that one again?
Do that again.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll tackle it. So yes, you could include contiguous communities as long as you're serving CIF communities. Make sure that it's on the list of 55 eligible communities. And you could certainly design your program the way you feel it's appropriate to submit in regards to what allowable funding you would have. But again, keep in mind Connecticut Boost Small Business Support Program. Here's a good one. Is there a timeline during which the projects must take place? Such as, does it need to take place in the next 4 years of CIF?
So the project timeline is not limited to this 5 years that we're talking about with CIF. The 5 years only talk about the timeline in terms of the application period and how many years of funding are available. There's not, unlike some grants that say, okay, all the funds need to be expended by a certain date. We have different project types here. So we will be determining a timeline on a grant by grant basis. So that's something that you're going to want to communicate what your timeline is for this project when you're applying.
Here's one. Could partial funding pay for a feasibility study for a community arts center? Our project is on a brownfield redevelopment that DECD has supported.
Yes, partial funding is available around planning, and so a feasibility study would fit under that. I mean, it's on you to communicate what the end result is that you're looking for and what that end result is going to have in terms of an impact and transformational effect on your community and the underserved population in your community.
Question about the alternative reapplication process. Would a new support letter from the state rep be needed?
No, we're not requiring additional letters from new letters from state reps, any of the General Assembly members. But anything that you feel is important to include, you can include. We outlined in the NOFA what things are required in that reapplication process.
And just a clarification for a question here. If your application was eligible but not recommended, you can use the abbreviated application program. But if you were deemed ineligible, you must reapply. Some questions about where all of the forms are located. That is portal.ct.gov/community investment fund. That's our website. You can find all of the information there. That's where the webinar will be posted as well.
There's a question around admin or indirect costs of 10 to 15%. We'd need to look at what those are project by project. In general, we're trying to limit soft costs as much as possible. By soft costs, we're referring to costs associated with a capital project that are not construction. So architecture, engineering, those kinds of fees. We're trying to limit those, but they are eligible. Admin or indirect costs, I don't know exactly what that refers to, but operating funds for a nonprofit, for example, are not eligible. So if someone's asking about administrative funds to run the programming of a nonprofit, that would not be eligible. But we are allowing professional service fees as part of a capital project, but trying to limit that as well to try to spend most of these funds on actual construction and capital.
There's a question in the Q&A, are healthcare facilities included? As long as the project itself and the applicant are eligible, yes, healthcare facilities are definitely included. There seem to be a lot of questions around the issue if your project is already underway. Are you eligible?
So to start, if your project is already underway, what you're going to have, you can't use CIF funds to reimburse yourself for expenses that you've already incurred. And the other piece is that as we're trying to assess, is this a good use of taxpayer dollars? Why are CIF funds needed to make this project occur? If your project is already underway, then I think that it would be a challenge to indicate why CIF funds are needed. In terms of the grant funds as well, this is going to have to follow state of Connecticut bidding and procurement processes. So it could be a challenge if you've already started and have not had a process that is going to stand up and match what the state would need you to have done in the selection of your contractors. That would be a challenge.
I'm going to reiterate, the applications are not scored. There's no rubric for a scoring system. DECD acts as an administrator that provides an executive summary with strengths and weaknesses and how the application abides by DECD best practices, but there's no scoring rubric. There's a question about eligible underserved populations, handicapped, special needs individuals of all races, ethnicities, genders, etc. Would they be considered underserved?
So the
I was gonna say the language was on the slides that'll be shared. So it's really specific in statute. So just refer to that language that's in this deck, which will be shared and on the website to figure out how to define that. I think someone asked if projects scored really well in round one, but were not funded and have already gone out to bid and awarded that bid, is it still eligible? I think this is basically the question Matt just answered about the funds will not be eligible for reimbursement by CIF. But expenses will not be eligible for reimbursement by CIF if they were incurred before the awards, before the bond commission at which the project is funded. So if that timing doesn't line up and you're starting to spend money before you get approved on a bond commission, then those costs would not be eligible for CIF reimbursement.
Now, a follow-up on that, Alexandra. If the project that is underway has followed current DECD and DOH procurement processes, would that be an eligible project that's still ongoing?
The cost, any invoice that's dated before you receive the funds, before you are awarded the funds by the bond commission, any cost that's incurred before that date is not eligible for CIF reimbursement. That's how all the DECD programs work. If you get a Brownfields award, a Communities Challenge award, you can only use our money to pay for things that are happening after you found out you got our award.
But in this case, someone who is doing a phased project could apply for another phase.
Yes. So
as long as they're following all the guidelines already.
If you wanted to use the same contractor for a second phase and you had not incurred any of the expense yet, but you had done the bidding and that bidding was compliant with DECD, yes, you could then now incur new expenses with that same procured contractor from the past. Yeah.
Great clarification. Thank you. Oh, here's a great question. Something we can clarify for everyone. Applicants not recommended for funding will receive written feedback. Anyone, whether eligible or ineligible, receives feedback from the DECD team as administrator. So you'll have your strengths, weaknesses, an executive summary written by the staff, summarizing the project as staff see it. And that is available to every applicant. It's one of the great processes that we have with CIF.
And if you didn't receive it from round one, then please reach out because we sent those out to every single applicant the first week of October.
Someone said, what about using women and minority owned businesses? Is there any merit given to that? So there are only a couple of statutorily provided ways for a project to get priority. Matt went through those earlier. So just because something is not counted in one of those priorities, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be considered a strength of the project, and it might be highlighted as the strength of the project, and the board might keep it in mind in the future. So just because there's a very limited list of official ways to get priority, there's anything that the board deems to be positive and a good attribute of a project can be taken into consideration when they go and to make their decision.
And this has come up several times recently with projects that are funded, but costs have skyrocketed. Can an applicant apply for that gap in funding on a project that's already underway if all bidding requirements have been met?
Yes, I would say that there's not a limitation if costs have gone up. I think that it's still important to stress why CIF funds are needed to complete the project. You know, can is there, and explore things like, have you value engineered the project? Are there other sources of funds that are available? We're trying to assess that these are good use of taxpayer dollars.
Okay, I think we've made our way through the Q&A.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. We will be posting FAQs on the website early next week and we'll be posting both webinar recordings as well. And again, please reach out with your questions via email or set a time for one-on-one Melinda and myself to discuss your project. Applications are due January 6th. Thank you very much. Have a good day.